Thank you, Chairman. Secretary of Defense and Urban Development, Commander of the Army, distinguished guests, today we are talking of nation building. I feel that better late than never, a subject that we should have been discussing 60 years ago. 60 years ago, the failures of Sri Lanka is what we have faced. People talk of 30 years of conflict, but I believe the genesis of Sri Lanka's problems arose as early as in the 1940s, before independence. So I think it is important that we look at Sri Lanka's, what are the things that we failed and what contributed towards a severe, a ravaging time that Sri Lanka has faced, especially the northern and eastern parts of the country. I believe it is important that we understand that when we discuss ethnic conflict, in fact, Sri Lanka's past was, if you look at our 2 millennia of history, ethnicity played a very little part to Sri Lanka's politics and history of that time. In fact, I would argue that if you start to look at the 1930s, just before the independent movement was emerging, that until that time, the ethnic dimension did not play a significant part. Now you talk of ethnic politics, the Tamils, the Sinhalese, the Moors, the Burghers who make up of this country. The two groups, that is the Tamils and the Sinhalese, shared this island for millennia, 2 millennia. And the Tamil population, by and large, lived amongst the Sinhalese without problem. However, the start of a new fear psychosis, I would argue, was created when a large number of plantation Tamils were brought into Sri Lanka by the British colonialists. If you look at our plantations, majority of those areas were forested with important villages where the Sinhalese population and the Tamil population lived. And Sinhalese were majority and the Tamils were a minority, but they coexisted. However, that dimension started to change in the 1800s and 1900s, and leading to a more of an ethnic dimension to be played. Within Sri Lanka, the Sri Lankan Tamils were numerically small group who were occupying in most parts of the country. And they were in the courts of various kings. In fact, today's Sri Lanka's capital, Jayawardhanapura Kotte, was founded by a Tamil administrator who was fighting tax collecting processes from Kingdom of Jaffna, which arose in the 1400s. So it is important to understand that how Sri Lanka's history started to make a change. And Tamils, of course, Sri Lankan Tamils, mostly from the northern part of the country, were used as administrators by the British colonialists. They established their English language schools in the north and also in the east, where they educated the bureaucrats to administer their colonial government. And just before the independence, we started to witness a large number of Tamils who were being brought, a new idea was brought in, that is, Tamils who were minority were going to lose the political and administrative control in Sri Lanka. In fact, Tamil leaders of that time, they were very much in favor of unitarism as opposed to federalism. Why? They were in control and they had access to power. However, in post-independent Sri Lanka, with the majority of the population being Sinhalese, we started to see that the Tamil population's fear i.e. the Tamil bureaucrats feeling that they will lose their substantial power that they enjoyed under the British administrators, would lead to them losing control of things what they enjoyed, or benefits that they enjoyed. This, I think, is very poignant, because if you look at the leaders, Tamil leaders who were in the early part of 1940s, were demanding, and they were in favor of unitarism, not federalism. And I want to talk of unitarism and federalism because today it's once again becomes very important to Sri Lanka's future. And in 1940s, that was the time that an alternative thoughts were brought in to this unitarism. Why? They felt naturally they cannot be in control, so federalism could be an alternative where the Tamil bureaucrats can have a greater control of their affairs, especially at least in the northern and eastern parts of the country, where the Tamil population were majority. So it is important that we realize that how Sri Lankan conflict, or rather the ethnic conflict, arose out of benefits and interests. And when we talk of ethnicity, ethnicity only started to become a significant dimension in the 50s and onwards. And people, for an example, we should look at major incidents that has caused the Tamil population to feel that they were marginalized. One of the examples would be the standardization that was brought in getting admission to universities. University admissions were to be standardized so that areas, districts where population did not have a greater entrance were given preference. So it's a positive discrimination. In fact, if you look at Sri Lanka's 25 districts, 23 out of the 25 districts benefited from that policy. That included 7 Tamil majority districts. However, it was used for political purposes by claiming there was ethnic discrimination. And that is a very important point. If you look at Jaffna district, traditionally had people going to good schools, and they had a greater number of university entrants. However, if you take districts such as Batiklo, Trincomalee, Vavuniya, Manna, all were Tamil majority districts where the university entrants were much smaller numbers. So those districts benefited from it. However, if you look back in history, when people talk of standardization and discrimination, it's been given an ethnic angle, which wasn't the case in my opinion. So this is the genesis of this conflict. Today, I want to just bring you back to today's northern and eastern provinces, because northern and eastern provinces are, of course, have 50, almost nearly half of Sri Lanka's maritime boundary, and also have important resources, including its forests and its landmass. Today, post-conflict Sri Lanka, in 2009, one should remember when the LTTE were defeated, it gave a shock to many. International players, Tamil diaspora, and why not even Tamils in the northern and eastern Sri Lanka, as well as the rest of the country. Why? Because there was a belief that LTTE will not be defeated, going back to the past. And it also, many international players were rather upset. How dare that Sri Lanka can go against the trend, where the trend of this century is about negotiations, is about settlements, and Sri Lanka has bucked that trend. In fact, LTTE were comprehensively defeated, and that was a problem for significant players in the international community. And why was it a surprise to the Tamils? Because LTTE were a ruthless organization, and at least nearly 40,000 families have lost at least one member due to the LTTE. This is, I'm giving you a 40-year history, including internal killings, inter-militant rivalries, and also them wiping out number of innocent civilians. And I'm talking about Tamil civilians. So that aspect of it is never discussed. And LTTE ensured that the Tamil population will not have alternative voices. But remember, LTTE only became a symptom. In fact, the causes were even prior to that, where Tamil nationalism grew in the 1950s and 1960s and 1970s, where the Tamils were given a new dream. And I think it's very poignant that we realize what it was. That LTT's two main motto was that the tiger's thirst is a Tamil country, but even more, that there are no lands where Tamil doesn't live, but there are no land that a Tamil can call his own. And they did not, of course, want to include Tamil Nadu, which they did not regard it as a separate country. In fact, this ideology was propagated. People of Tamil descent lived far and wide. Trinidad and Tobago, South Africa, and today, of course, the greater Sri Lankan Tamil diaspora from Toronto to London to Sydney. They were given this new dream where, like that of Israelis, that they could have a country of their own, where they will have everything. It will be a land of milk and honey, and a new dream was devised as early as 1970s. At that time, Tamil leaders, prominent Tamil leaders, who were elected by the people, traveled far and wide. I remember that TULF leader, Mr. Appapillai Amrithalingam, who succumbed to LTTE's bullets, once in Singapore famously propagated this view as early as 1975, the year I was born. So, in fact, it had a far and wide consequences, but also had the genesis going back prior to the LTTE. Sri Lankan Tamils, today, we number around 3 million people in the country, live in every district that you can think of. In fact, when we are discussing about northern and eastern provinces, as many as half the Sri Lankan Tamil population live outside those two respective provinces. And, however, the Tamils of Sri Lanka have been victims of this dream of creating a separate state. Today, I believe there are a number of elements at play. One is, of course, the Tamil diaspora, the Sri Lankan, as well as a greater Tamil diaspora of Tamils of Indian descent. Tamil Nadu, an important player within the Indian Union and also a significant opinion maker. And thirdly, and more significantly, the Tamils of the northern and eastern provinces. Because I do believe when people discuss about ethnic issues, they invariably limit those issues to the northern and eastern provinces, where there are Tamils living in every other part of the country. So let's look at Tamil Nadu. I think it's very important because Tamil Nadu has been, I would say, ideologically, Tamil Nadu started to provide the Sri Lankan Tamils with a new thought of a nation. This went as early as 1950s. In fact, the Dravidian movement, when it developed in the 1950s, played a significant role in the emergence of Tamil nationalism in Sri Lanka. They were the ideological forebearers for the Sri Lankan Tamils. Today, if you go to the YouTube, anti-Sri Lanka sentiments are far and wide. The Tamil film industry, to politicians, they look at Sri Lanka and Sri Lankan Tamil issue with a very large smoke screen. Why? They have now invented history. An example that now my district, Batiklo, was never part of a Tamil kingdom. In fact, it was part of either Polonnaruwa or Kandy. It continued. In fact, the Tamils are migrants who came during the 11th century. Most of the Batiklo district was largely uninhabited. So to give an ethnic dimension of a perceived state that existed is historically inaccurate. In fact, we can take times when we, in Sri Lanka, have had Tamil monarchs. In fact, even whenever we had chieftains, whether it's Vanni or Jaffna, their dream was to become the kings of the whole island, never to create a separate Tamil homeland, which was never the case. In fact, whether it was during the medieval time, ancient time, or for that matter, until 1950s, when the new federalist idea was brought out as an alternative to gaining control within at least part of the island. So, it is important that we realize that Tamil Nadu has a perception of Sri Lanka and moreover is inaccurate. And without changing such perceptions, we are leading to an era where conflicts brew. And we are leading to an era where the Tamils of Sri Lanka become pawns in this new age of political maneuvering by politicians in Tamil Nadu. Secondly, of course, the Tamil diaspora. People do not realize. You go to a city like London, there are as many as 300,000 Tamils. In fact, you go to many constituencies within the Greater London, where marginal constituencies, where politicians have to rely on block votes by Tamil migrants. In fact, there are more Tamils of Jaffna origin. In fact, there are as many as twice as many Tamils who are living in Europe and North America than in Jaffna, than in even Sri Lanka. In fact, there are as many as over 1 million Tamils. Again, I want to speak on this issue because if you look at the last 3 years where I have been back in Sri Lanka, in fact, I came back in 2009, and I'm sharing my experience of what I've witnessed. I'll give you one simple example to you. Today, from Batticaloa to Trincomalee, it takes us about an hour and a half to travel. But in my childhood memory, even before the conflict started, it used to take us 7 hours to travel between Batticaloa to Trincomalee. In fact, there were many bridges and roads have been created, and it has made traveling so easy today. In fact, as a consequence, a city like Batticaloa, a town, today almost entire population is living in an urban area. Why? Because they know they can go and cultivate in the morning and come back in the evening without any problem. So the dynamics have changing, social conditions are changing. And there has been massive changes. If you look at Batticaloa or Trincomalee today, vast potentials are being realized for tourism, economic conditions are improving, employments are being created. But remember, as many as 5,000 individuals have fled Sri Lanka and Batticaloa in the last 2 years. How and why? They have fled through various means, illegally traveling by boats to Australia or trying to migrate to one of the European countries. And you have to ask yourself why that phenomena is taking place. I will tell you simply, it's the aspiration that has been created by the Tamil diaspora, whereby a Tamil from Batticaloa or Jaffna today, a young boy or a girl, wants to marry a guy from Toronto, London, or Sydney, not a person from back home, because they see a vastly improved economic conditions. And today, you speak to a youngster, why not, there are employment being created, why don't you work in a hotel here? He said, well, they're only paying us 30,000 rupees, but my cousin is earning about a few 100,000 by being in London. I want to go there. So that perception has also meant that vast number of Tamils have fled the country. And this has been used by non-governmental organizations, human rights activists, as they are leaving because of the conditions are oppressive in Sri Lanka, which is far from the truth. And if you travel to east of the country today, it has been the peaceful it has been as early from, I would say, in the 70s. Today, there are no armed culture. In fact, we went through from as early as 1980s, it was the norm. Every kid knew about weapons. You name them, they will tell you this is what it is. So today, there has been a significant shift and change. But still, that these people who are fleeing for different reasons, are being used for propaganda purposes. So it is important that people realize this. And empathy by the greater Tamil diaspora is been significant because they have looked at Sri Lanka, they have looked at the Tamil population, and they have continued with this view. Now today, if you go to London or Paris and take a newspaper and read, they still talk of separatism. They still talk of a new state. They still give the dream, what we lost through war, we can gain politically. Who suffers as a consequence? The people in Sri Lanka. The Tamils are the losers. Even when people discuss federalism, I touched on federalism earlier. Today, if you look at, Tamils live in every district. In fact, today, the Tamils of Sri Lanka will benefit greatly by having a unitarist system because they live in every part of the country, and the best solution for them is to share the benefits, the powers at national level by having equality and equality of opportunities, not by trying to reintroduce, trying to create some kind of a devolved unit, which is more in the minds of politicians than the ordinary man. I'll give you an example to you. Now, we discuss about the famous 13th Amendment, which has given land and police powers to the provincial council. In fact, provincial councils, Sri Lanka's provinces are a creation by our colonialists, the British, the modern 9 provinces. They, in fact, created the 9 provinces and abandoned them in favor of districts, which they found were impractical, incohesive, and they found it very difficult to administer Sri Lanka through the provincial system. And the provinces were forgotten entities until 1987, the Indo-Lanka Accord, which revived this provincial system. And today, when we talk of granting police powers and land powers, somehow the Tamil community, how would the Tamil community, which is spread, living in every part of the country, now I'll give you an example to you. In Noralia district, there are 400,000 Tamils. In Badulla district, there are 150,000 Tamils. In Ratnapura district, there are over 100,000 Tamils. In Kandy, well over 100,000 Tamils. In Colombo, there are 300,000 Tamils. And these Tamil population, how would they be served by a federalist system, a federal system of any description? In fact, take my province, the Eastern province, which went through many years of suffering. The Tamil population went through years of suffering. They number about 33 to 34% today, as little as that. In fact, even our last census claimed that there were 39% of the population, but we think it's much smaller than that. Continuously, people have sort of left. So how would they benefit from having a land and police powers in the hands of a provincial council? In fact, this is the problem. Now, Sri Lanka, moving on, has to look at a system where all population, Tamils, Sinhalese, Muslims, Burghers, they can share and benefits in the country at national level and not at regional level. And I think it is important that our friends across the Park Strait realize that it is in the interest of Sri Lankan Tamils to allow a unitary form of government to emerge, understanding the ground realities today. And it is important for Sri Lankan Tamils and Sri Lanka as a whole to devise mechanisms that would fit Sri Lanka's needs today, as opposed to at a perceived time in the past. And it is interesting that now we talk of nationalism, both in different form, ethnic nationalisms, and also patriotism as a whole, as 2 alternatives it's been viewed. In Sri Lanka, there is a rise of ethnic nationalism as a consequence of continuously the governments of the past have ignored mechanism to integrate various populations. You have, if you come to our eastern district of Batticaloa, you will find that divisional secretariats created on the basis of religion. There are Muslim educational divisions created, where the Tamil population and the Muslim population speak the same language, but 3 different towns are administered just because those 3 towns are populated by Islamic population. Even if you look at Islamic fundamentalism is emerging and rising. You travel to the Eastern Province. If you've gone back 30 years ago, you will not find the kind of environment that persists today. Tamil nationalism is taking a significant rise in a different form. Yes, there are no chance of terrorism re-emerging as long as the defense forces manage and maintain and continue with what they are doing. If you do not, there's plenty of supporters overseas who would be willing to raise funds to create another conflict. In fact, if you go and speak to an ordinary Tamil man in the streets of Paris, they will say, how come they haven't, not a single bomb has exploded since the war ended? In fact, they are speaking with sorrow, because for them, they've been given this ideology that this is somewhat, you can sacrifice everything in the interest of creating a separate state. So, Sri Lanka's challenges are many. And when we look at northern and eastern provinces of Sri Lanka, they, of course, are going to be at the core of Sri Lanka's future. Eastern province, blessed with a fine natural harbor in Trincomalee, and also many beaches and attractive destinations, forests. In fact, we talk of when Sri Lanka achieved independence, more than 65% of the country was forested. Today, less than half that we find as forests. But fortunately, the northern and eastern provinces have a large share of forest reserve. So it is significant today, even for environmental concerns, that the northern and eastern provinces may provide the balance that Sri Lanka would badly require. I think it is important when we look at the future of Sri Lanka that we do not continue with the past mistakes of ethnic politics and governments pandering to ethnic politics. An ethnic dimension does not take roots for the future. And I do believe the Tamils, the Sinhalese, the Muslims, and the Burghers have only one future, that is together. And that is exemplified by the role played by the Sri Lankan army and the armed forces, especially when it comes to reconstruction. And I will give you some examples to you. And when I travel across many villages, they will come and tell you, you know, sir, we want army people to build our roads. We want army people to build our bridges. I said, why? If you give it to somebody, some politician will take bribe and it will be less money will be spent on those roads. And that's the view that I hear, you know, in every village. I'm telling you, it's very, very popular. They are very popular because when they come and build your roads, they build it within such a short time. So when people discuss about the role of the army in reconstruction, I think the Eastern Province is the finest example of where the army and the armed forces as a whole played such a positive role. In fact, even today, I mean, my old parliamentarian from Batticaloa, Mr. Prince Kasinatha, very eminent person, he's in his 90s, he said, look, our school is going to enjoy the 200th anniversary. This is the oldest school established by the colonialists in 1814. So can you ask these army people to come and do the refurbishment and do the buildings? I said, what about education? Those fellows will take about 5 years to do it. And this is an attitude shown by many people which is not shared by those who want to see the military play a lesser role in reconstruction and development. So these are examples that we have seen. There was a time that I mean, one of my earliest memories, in fact, when I was about 11 years of age, a lady was hanged in Batiklo town. And the reason was that she shared some orange juice or some cold drink with the army people who were guarding that area. But you have to understand, that was the plan, which was to try and ensure that the army is kept away from the civilians as much as possible. You distance them from them so that the ultimate goal was to create a fear psychosis amongst the Tamil population, which succeeded in the 80s. So I do genuinely believe that the role of the armed forces, especially in Sri Lanka, and if you take a poll today across the country, and they see the real benefits, city after city, these guys who turn up in trucks, and overnight you see roads change, the area having parks created. So that positivity, no one can underestimate in reconciliation, because reconciliation cannot be achieved in Sri Lanka without development, and development cannot be achieved without resources, and these resources are readily available in the hands of our armed forces, in the form of our armed forces. So, how do I see the future? I see the future in various thinking, various thoughts. First is, Sri Lanka has to evolve a political system that suits Sri Lanka. And I do not believe that any amount of pressure from externally will benefit Sri Lanka. Even speaking from the ethnic dimension, I genuinely believe that the world have failed to understand the complexities and the historic concerns that has arose. And we have, as a country, moving forward, we will create, and we have to create, suitable political reforms that suits this country without any interference from outside world. And we have to deal with many new menaces that are terrorism in the new form, in the information age, with motivated young Tamils who are now growing up thinking that Sri Lanka is a demonized state where they do not understand. In fact, to this day, the most popular propaganda in the cities of London and Sydney and Toronto, don't go to Sri Lanka. In fact, they do everything possible to stop people from coming here, because everybody who has come here, as far as I know, they invariably tend to return. And I was one of them. I came here and I decided not to return to London. I stayed back. And likewise, many, many young people are coming, and they're finding they've been drawn by the wonders that exist within this country. So to all of you delegates, what I would urge is this. Remember, Sri Lanka defeated terrorism. Sri Lanka defeated LTTE, and LTTE weren't just another terrorist organization. They had a far and wide support. In fact, I can even go back as early as 1980s when the Indian armed forces were engaged in conflict, where they received many external support from various other powers. And so LTT manipulated every country, what they can, to their own goal. They were ruthless. They killed many people. They continued, they created a truly dynamic authoritarian regime within that northern area they controlled, and they are no longer. And Sri Lanka managed to defeat them, and it is still, people like myself, we still pinch and say, is it real? Because most people, and I will tell you, most Tamils will not believe that LTT were defeated, but they are. In fact, many Tamils thought that within 3 weeks something is going to happen. 6 months there will be a revival. Within a year there will be a revival. The Tamil diaspora went to an extent of claiming that Prabhakaran was alive, many leaders were alive, and so on and so forth. They were creating all this hope because they had to hold on to something, because nobody could believe that LTT were defeated. Today, well and truly LTT are defeated. But the challenges that will face Sri Lanka and the international community will continue. There are 2 million Tamils living across many Western capitals who will continue with, to demand actions against Sri Lanka. And I do genuinely believe the 3 million Tamils in Sri Lanka have paid ultimate price for this huge urge for a conceived ethnic homeland. So every city, whether it may be Islamabad or it may be Beijing, even there you will find that the impacts of this Tamil nationalism will be heard there. So I think that Sri Lanka's future is very much intertwined with your future, and it is important that every country understands and doesn't underestimate the intentions of a greater Tamil diaspora who are smarting from the perceived loss of a glorious years that have gone by in the medieval period. And I think it is significant that we realize that. Thank you.